Blood smeared across the white tiles of Mercy General Hospital's emergency corridor, trailing from the ambulance bay to the trauma unit. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood frozen, watching armed men in tactical gear drag a screaming administrator past overturned gurneys while staff cowered behind nursing stations. Outside, black government vehicles blocked every exit. The hospital's chief of medicine was on his knees, hands zip-tied, face drained of color. Just 3 hours earlier, these same people had been laughing at Sarah, calling her paranoid, mocking her concerns about missing patients and falsified death certificates. They'd humiliated her in front of the entire staff, threatened her career, demanded her resignation. What they didn't know, what no one in Sterling Falls knew, was that the quiet trauma nurse they'd just destroyed wasn't who she appeared to be. Before we continue, I need you to stick with me until the very end of this story. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Sarah Mitchell had been invisible for 3 years. That was the point. Blend in, keep your head down. Work the overnight shifts at Mercy General, where nobody asked questions, and everyone was too exhausted to notice patterns. She'd chosen Sterling Falls specifically because it was the kind of mid-sized city that existed in the blur between somewhere and nowhere, big enough to disappear in, small enough that ambition kept people looking forward instead of around. The emergency department at 2 in the morning had a particular quality to it. Fluorescent lights hummed against linoleum that had been mopped so many times the pattern had worn to a dull sheen. The smell was always the same, disinfectant trying to mask blood, vomit, fear. Sarah had smelled worse, much worse. Trauma 2 needs fresh IV bags, Marcus called from across the nurses' station. He was young, maybe 26, with the kind of optimism that hadn't been beaten out of him yet. And someone should check on the guy in Bay 7. He's been asking for pain meds every 20 minutes. Sarah grabbed the supplies without looking up from her charting. He's drug-seeking. Chart says he's been in 4 times this month with the same complaint. Different story each time. How do you know that? I read the files. She moved through the department with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. Start the line. Check vitals. Document everything. Don't get attached. The overnight attending was Dr. Richard Brennan, a man who'd clearly given up on excellence somewhere around his second divorce. He signed off on whatever the residents suggested and spent most of his shifts in the break room watching sports highlights on his phone. At 3:47 a.m., the ambulance radio crackled to life. Mercy General, this is Medic 9. We're inbound with a critical GSW to the chest. Male approximately 40 years old, BP dropping, multiple. The transmission cut to static. Sarah's hand stopped mid-reach for a supply cabinet. She glanced at the radio, then at Marcus, who was frowning at the dead air. That's weird, he said. They usually give us an ETA. Call them back. Marcus keyed the radio. Medic 9, this is Mercy General. Please repeat your last transmission. Nothing. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest, the same instinct that had kept her alive in places where hesitation meant death. She walked to the ambulance bay doors and looked out into the parking lot. Empty. The sodium lights cast everything in orange and shadow. Maybe they diverted to county, Marcus offered behind her. Maybe, but she didn't believe it. County was 15 minutes farther, and Mercy General was the designated trauma center for the district. A critical GSW wouldn't get diverted unless something was very wrong. She went back to her charting, but the feeling didn't leave. By 6 a.m., the day shift started filtering in. Dr. Brennan disappeared without signing off properly. The morning attending was Dr. Philip Garrison, a man who wore his authority like expensive cologne. Too much, too obvious. He had the kind of face that appeared on hospital promotional materials. Square jaw, perfect teeth, silver hair that suggested wisdom without actual age. Mitchell, he said, barely glancing at her. You're still here? Shift ends at 7. He dropped his bag at the workstation and started scrolling through his phone. Well, try not to contaminate the morning with your overnight laziness. Sarah said nothing. She'd learned that silence was its own kind of power. But then she made a mistake. She pulled up the system logs to document her final charts and noticed something she shouldn't have seen. The patient manifest showed a GSW admission at 4:23 a.m. Male. Critical condition. transferred to ICU at 4:51 a.m. She hadn't seen any GSW patient. The trauma bay had been empty all night. Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard. This wasn't her business. Whatever had happened during the shift change was someone else's problem. She should log out, go home, sleep for 6 hours, and come back to do it all again. Instead, she clicked into the patient record. The file was minimal. No name listed as John Doe number 847. No insurance information, no family contact. Just a brief note. Gunshot wound to chest, stable post-op, transferred to ICU for observation. She checked the surgical log. No operation was scheduled. No OR had been used. The cold feeling in her chest spread to her limbs. Mitchell. Dr. Garrison's voice snapped across the workstation. I asked you a question. She looked up. Sorry, what? I said your shift is over. Why are you still here? Just finishing my charts. Your charts should have been done an hour ago. He walked over, close enough that she could smell coffee and aftershave. What are you looking at? Sarah closed the screen. Nothing, all set. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't push. Good, then get out. She clocked out and walked to her car in the staff parking lot. The sun was rising over Sterling Falls, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that felt obscene against the concrete and asphalt. She sat in her Honda Civic for 5 minutes, staring at the hospital entrance. This wasn't her problem. She started the car. But instead of driving home, she drove to the Sterling Falls Public Library. The library didn't open until 9, so she sat in a coffee shop across the street and drank burnt coffee that tasted like regret. Her apartment was a studio in a building that had been recently renovated according to the listing, which meant they'd painted over water damage and called it modern minimalism. She didn't spend much time there anyway. At 9:02 a.m., she was at a computer terminal in the library's research section. Sterling Falls had a local newspaper called the Daily Observer that maintained digital archives going back 30 years. Sarah started searching for unusual death notices, missing persons reports, anything that might connect to phantom patients appearing in hospital records. She found them within 20 minutes. Over the past 18 months, 7 people had been reported missing in Sterling Falls and the surrounding county. All adults. All with similar profiles, transient, low-income, minimal family connections. The kind of people who could disappear without generating sustained media attention. 3 of them had last been seen near Mercy General Hospital. Sarah sat back in her chair and pressed her palms against her eyes. She was being paranoid. These were probably just coincidences. Sterling Falls wasn't some major metropolitan hub. It made sense that a significant percentage of missing persons might pass through the only Level 2 trauma center in the region. Except, she pulled up the hospital's public financial records. Mercy General was technically a nonprofit, which meant certain financial disclosures were required by law. She scrolled through pages of dense budget reports until she found what she was looking for, a line item labeled External Research Partnerships. $14 million over the past 2 years. That was unusual. Mercy General wasn't affiliated with a university. It didn't have a major research department. She clicked deeper into the subsidiary documents and found a name, Helix Biosolutions. She'd never heard of it. A quick search revealed that Helix Biosolutions was a private medical research company based in Virginia, specializing in advanced therapeutic development and clinical trials. Their website was sleek and vague, filled with stock photos of scientists in lab coats and corporate language about breakthrough innovations. Sarah took a screenshot and saved it to a flash drive. She was definitely being paranoid. But she couldn't shake the image of that empty trauma bay at 4:23 a.m., or the patient record that appeared without any actual patient. Masu. That night, she came back to work for her regular shift. The emergency department had the usual chaos. A kid with a broken arm, a woman with chest pain that turned out to be anxiety, an elderly man who'd fallen and couldn't get up. Sarah moved through it all with mechanical precision, but her attention kept drifting to the patient records. She waited until Dr. Brennan was in the break room and Marcus was dealing with a belligerent drunk in Bay 4. Then she pulled up the system again and searched for John Doe number 847. The record had been deleted, not archived, deleted, as if the patient had never existed. Sarah felt her pulse spike. She checked the backup logs, the automatic saves, even the insurance billing queue. Nothing. The entire admission had been scrubbed from the system. Working hard, I see. She turned. Dr. Garrison stood behind her, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Just checking on a patient, Sarah said. Which patient? GSW from last night. Wanted to see how he was doing in ICU. We didn't have any GSW admissions last night. The system showed the system was wrong. He stepped closer. You seem very interested in things that aren't your concern, Mitchell. Is there a problem? Sarah met his eyes and saw something she recognized. A predator assessing threat level. No problem, she said. My mistake. Good, he smiled without warmth. Because I'd hate to think one of our nurses was creating problems where none exist. That would reflect very poorly on their performance review. The threat was obvious. Sarah nodded and turned back to her work. But that night, she started taking notes. Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah documented everything. She tracked ambulance calls that never arrived. She noted discrepancies in patient records, admissions that appeared and disappeared, surgical notes that didn't match OR schedules, death certificates with inconsistent timestamps. She cross-referenced missing persons reports with hospital logs and found patterns that shouldn't exist. She kept everything on her personal laptop, backed up to an encrypted cloud drive that she accessed through a VPN. Old habits. The more she dug, the worse it looked. Mercy General wasn't just mismanaging records. Someone was using the hospital as a pipeline, moving patients who wouldn't be missed, falsifying documentation, erasing evidence. The question was why? She found the answer on a Tuesday night in early November. She was covering a shift in the ICU. They were short-staffed, and Sarah had the critical care certifications. When she walked past room 347 and heard voices inside. The room was supposed to be empty. She'd checked the patient board an hour ago. She stopped outside the door. Should have been processed yesterday. That was Dr. Garrison's voice. The transport was delayed. A second voice, unfamiliar. Male, clipped accent. We'll have the extraction completed by morning. This is the 4th delay in 2 months. Your people need to be more reliable. Your people need to provide better candidates. The last 2 were unusable. Sarah's hand moved to her pocket, closing around her phone. She activated the voice recording app without looking. We're doing the best we can with the parameters you've given us, Garrison said. You want healthy donors under 50 with no significant medical history and minimal social connections. That's not an infinite pool. Then expand your search radius. We're already pulling from 3 counties. Any more and we risk pattern recognition. Silence. Then the unfamiliar voice. The buyers are paying premium rates. If you can't deliver consistent product, we'll find a facility that can. Understood. We'll have 2 more candidates by the end of the week. Footsteps approached the door. Sarah turned and walked quickly toward the nurse's station, forcing herself not to run. She made it around the corner just as the door opened. She busied herself with random paperwork, keeping her head down. 2 men emerged. Dr. Garrison she recognized. The other man was tall, wearing an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase. They walked past without noticing her. Sarah's hands were shaking. She waited until they were gone, then checked room 347. It was empty. No patient, no equipment, just the smell of disinfectant and something metallic underneath. She went to the bathroom and vomited. For 2 days, she did nothing. She went to work. She smiled at patients. She took orders from doctors. She acted like the recording on her phone didn't exist. But on the 3rd day, she made copies. Multiple copies. Cloud storage, flash drives, email drafts saved to separate accounts. Then she sent a secure message to a number she hadn't called in 5 years. The response came back within an hour. Stand by. That's when Sarah knew she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Yeah, they came for her on a Friday morning. She'd just finished a shift and was getting ready to leave when Dr. Garrison appeared with 2 hospital administrators she'd never met. One was a woman in a severe pantsuit named Helen Voss, the hospital's chief operating officer. The other was a man called David Reeves, head of security. Miss Mitchell, Voss said, her voice sharp as broken glass. We need to speak with you. Conference room. Now. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to run, but she'd learned a long time ago that running just confirmed guilt. What's this about? Conference room, Voss repeated. They walked through the hospital corridors in silence. Staff members noticed and whispered. Sarah kept her face neutral. The conference room was on the administrative floor, all glass walls and uncomfortable chairs. Voss closed the door and pulled the blinds. "You've been making inquiries," she said without preamble, "about patient records, about admissions that supposedly don't exist. I was concerned about documentation errors. You were accessing files outside your scope of practice," Reeves interrupted. "We have logs showing you've been pulling records you have no business viewing." Sarah said nothing. "You've also been asking questions around the hospital," Voss continued, "implying impropriety, creating a hostile work environment with baseless accusations. I haven't accused anyone of anything. Your actions speak for themselves." Dr. Garrison leaned against the table, arms crossed. "You're a good nurse, Mitchell, but you're clearly experiencing some kind of stress, paranoia, burnout. We've seen it before. The playbook was obvious. Discredit her, frame her as unstable, destroy her credibility before she could become a real problem." "I'm not burned out," Sarah said calmly. "I'm noticing patterns in patient care that concern me as a medical professional. That's not paranoia, that's due diligence." Voss's expression hardened. "You're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation into your conduct." "What conduct?" "Unauthorized access to patient records, violation of HIPAA protocols, insubordination." She pushed a piece of paper across the table. "You'll surrender your badge and complete an exit interview with HR." Sarah looked at the paper. It was a termination notice disguised as administrative leave. "And if I refuse?" "Then we'll call the police and have you escorted out for trespassing." Reeves smiled without humor. "Your choice." Sarah stood slowly. She could fight this, lawyer up, make noise, but that would take time, and time meant they'd cover their tracks completely. "Fine," she said, "but I want it in writing that I've raised concerns about patient safety and documentation errors. I want that in my file." "That won't be necessary," Voss said. "It's policy." They stared at each other across the conference table. Finally, Voss nodded to Reeves, who made a note on his tablet. "Done," he said flatly. Sarah handed over her badge. They walked her to her locker, watched her collect her belongings, then escorted her to the exit like a criminal. Staff members stared. Some looked away. Marcus caught her eye from across the hall, confusion and concern written on his face. She wanted to tell him to be careful, to watch his back, to get out while he could. Instead, she just walked out into the morning sun and got in her car. She sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, watching the hospital entrance in her rearview mirror. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Package received. Asset verification in progress. Maintain position. Sarah closed her eyes and took a slow breath. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd silenced her, isolated her, removed the problem before it could metastasize. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Sarah Mitchell hadn't been a trauma nurse her entire career. Before Sterling Falls, before the quiet life and overnight shifts, she'd been Senior Medical Officer Sarah Mitchell, United States Army Special Operations Command. She'd spent 7 years embedded with classified units in places that didn't exist on maps, treating wounded operators while bullets snapped overhead, coordinating medical evacuations under fire, and documenting war crimes committed by people who thought they were untouchable. She'd left that life after a mission went wrong in ways that still woke her up at night. She'd been promised a clean break, a fresh start, a chance to be normal. But apparently normal was overrated. Her phone buzzed again. This time with a different message. Confirmation received, authorization granted, extraction team deploying, ETA 90 minutes. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. 90 minutes. She started the car and drove home. In her apartment, she opened the closet and pulled out a storage container she hadn't touched in 3 years. Inside was a sat phone, encrypted tablets, 3 different IDs, and a .45 caliber Sig Sauer P220 that she'd carried through 4 deployments. She checked the weapon, loaded it, and set it on the kitchen counter. Then she made coffee and waited. At exactly 11:47 a.m., her sat phone rang. "Mitchell? This is Colonel Raymond Hayes, Defense Intelligence Agency." The voice was crisp, no nonsense. "You sent us some interesting recordings. And we've been watching Mercy General for 6 months. Your data confirms what we suspected. Helix Biosolutions is a front for an international organ trafficking network. They've been using rural hospitals to harvest from vulnerable populations, refugees, homeless, people without documentation. Sarah felt sick. How many? Dozens? Maybe more. We're still assembling the full scope. A pause. You did good work, Mitchell, but you're compromised now. They know you're a threat. I can handle myself. I'm sure you can, but that's not why I'm calling. Another pause. We need you to go back. Sarah's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. Excuse me? We have teams moving into position, but we need someone on the inside when things go loud. Someone who knows the facility layout, who won't panic when shooting starts. Someone they've already discounted as a threat. You want me to walk back into a place where people are actively trying to bury me? I want you to do what you've always done. Stand in the gap and save lives. We're moving assets into position now. By 2 p.m., we'll have the hospital locked down. But between now and then, we need eyes inside. We need someone who can protect potential victims if they try to sanitize the evidence. Sarah looked at her gun on the counter. What's my authorization? Full operational authority. Rules of engagement standard. Protect civilians, neutralize threats, preserve evidence. You'll have support 30 seconds after you call for it. She should say no. She'd earned her quiet life. She'd paid her dues in blood and nightmares. But she thought about room 347 and the metallic smell underneath the disinfectant and the people who disappeared without anyone noticing. I'm in, she said, but I want full immunity and a new identity after this is over. Done. There's a car approaching your location now. Black SUV, federal plates. Driver will have credentials. Understood. Mitchell? Hayes' voice softened slightly. Don't die out there. We've lost enough good people. Copy that. She hung up and checked her weapon one more time. The knock on her door came exactly 90 seconds later. The driver was a woman named Agent Kim Torres, DEA, on loan to a joint task force. Sarah wasn't cleared to know about. They didn't speak during the drive back to Mercy General. Sarah used the time to run through scenarios, sight lines, exit routes. You'll enter through the main lobby, Torres said as they approached. We've got teams positioned on all exits, but they're holding perimeter until the signal. If you need immediate extraction, code word is Nightingale. Say it over any hospital phone or intercom, and we'll breach within 30 seconds. What's the signal for the main operation? You'll know it when it happens. They pulled up to the visitor entrance. Sarah got out, checked that her concealed weapon was properly hidden beneath her jacket, and walked through the front doors like she belonged there. The lobby was quiet. Just a few visitors signing in at the desk, a volunteer at the information booth. She bypassed them and took the stairs to the administrative floor. The plan was simple. Get to the records room, secure any physical evidence before they could destroy it, and wait for the cavalry. She made it halfway down the corridor before someone grabbed her arm. What the hell are you doing here? Marcus stared at her, confusion and alarm competing on his face. You're suspended. If security sees you... Marcus, listen to me very carefully. Sarah kept her voice low. In about 20 minutes, this hospital is going to be swarming with federal agents. You need to go to the cafeteria and stay there. Don't go to the ICU. Don't go to administration. Just stay in public areas until it's over. What are you talking about? I don't have time to explain. Please, just trust me. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, this is about the missing patients, isn't it? The records you were looking at. Yes, I knew it. He ran a hand through his hair. I thought I was going crazy. Things haven't made sense for months. You're not crazy, but you need to get clear, now. He nodded slowly. Okay, but Sarah, be careful. Dr. Garrison was in the ICU earlier with some men I've never seen before. They looked wrong. What room? 347. Of course. Thanks. Now go. Marcus hesitated, then squeezed her shoulder and headed toward the stairs. Sarah continued to the records room. The door was locked, but she'd prepared for that. A small set of pics she'd kept from her previous life made quick work of the mechanism. She slipped inside and closed the door behind her. The room was dark, lined with filing cabinets and computer terminals. She went to the terminal and logged in using her suspended credentials. Surprisingly, they still worked. Whoever had cut her access hadn't been thorough. She started copying files to a flash drive, patient records, financial documents, email correspondence, everything. That's when she heard the commotion outside, shouting, running footsteps, and then, unmistakably, Gunshots. Sarah grabbed the flash drive and drew her weapon. She moved to the door and listened. More shots. Screaming. The sound of something heavy crashing. This wasn't the signal. This was something else. She eased the door open and looked out. The corridor was empty, but she could hear chaos echoing from the direction of the ICU. Her phone buzzed. Text from Torres. Situation compromised. They're sanitizing. Nightingale. 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 The code word. Torres was calling for immediate breach. Sarah ran toward the ICU. She rounded the corner and nearly collided with a nurse fleeing in the opposite direction. "Get out!" the woman screamed. "They have guns!" Sarah pushed past her and hit the ICU entrance. Room 347's door was open. Inside, she could see two men in suits trying to move someone on a gurney. The patient was unconscious, intubated, clearly not capable of consenting to transport. "Federal officer!" Sarah leveled her weapon. "Step away from the patient!" Both men turned. One reached inside his jacket. "Don't," Sarah warned. He drew anyway. Sarah fired twice. Center mass. The man dropped. The second man released the gurney and ran for the far exit. Sarah let him go. Her priority was the patient. She rushed to the gurney and checked vitals. Alive. Stable. But the IV bag hanging above had a medication she didn't recognize. Behind her, she heard the sound of doors crashing open and boots thundering through corridors. Federal agents poured into the ICU, weapons drawn, shouting commands. "Clear! Room secure! We need medical here!" Sarah kept her hands visible, weapon pointed at the floor. "I'm the asset. Federal authorization." An agent approached, checked her ID, and nodded. "Mitchell? That's me. Colonel Hayes sends his regards. You just saved this guy's life." More agents flooded in. Some went to secure the rest of the floor. Others started documenting evidence. Sarah stepped back and let them work. Then she saw Dr. Garrison trying to walk calmly toward the emergency exit, white coat flapping, expression carefully neutral. "That's him," Sarah called out. "Dr. Philip Garrison. He's one of the primary operators." Agents converged. Garrison saw them coming and made a break for it. He didn't make it 10 feet before they had him on the ground, hands behind his back, shouting rights he probably wasn't really hearing. Sarah walked over and stood above him. His face was pressed against the floor, eyes wide with panic and rage. "You're just a nurse," he spat. "You're nobody." Sarah crouched down so he could see her clearly. "I was a lot of things before I was a nurse," she said quietly. "You should have done better research." Over the next 3 hours, Mercy General Hospital turned into a federal crime scene. They arrested 14 people, including Dr. Garrison, COO Helen Voss, Security Chief David Reeves, and 11 others connected to the trafficking operation. They found evidence of 43 victims over 18 months, with connections to similar schemes in 5 other states. In room 347, they found surgical equipment specifically designed for organ extraction. In the basement, they found a cold storage unit that shouldn't have existed according to any hospital blueprint. Sarah sat in the cafeteria with a cup of terrible coffee while agents took her statement. Marcus found her there, looking shell-shocked. "They're saying you're a federal agent," he said. "Was. Long time ago. But you came back as a nurse." "I liked being a nurse. It was supposed to be simple." "Is anything about you simple?" Sarah almost smiled. "Not really." "Are we safe now?" She looked around the cafeteria at the frightened staff and confused visitors and federal agents securing evidence. "Yeah," she said. "Now you're safe." Colonel Hayes appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 agents. He nodded to Sarah. "We need to debrief you. Probably going to take a while." Sarah stood, leaving her coffee behind. "One question," Marcus called after her. "Why did you come back after they fired you? You could have just walked away." Sarah paused at the doorway. "Because walking away would have meant they won," she said. "And I don't let monsters win." She followed Hayes into the corridor, past the agents and evidence bags and cameras documenting everything. Behind her, Mercy General Hospital continued breathing. Wounded but alive, secrets exposed to daylight, the rot finally cut away. And in the parking lot, black SUVs and federal vehicles surrounded the building like a protective wall, ensuring that no one else would disappear into the dark spaces between documentation and truth. The quiet nurse they'd dismissed as paranoid and powerless had just dismantled an empire. But that was only the beginning. The debriefing room smelled like stale coffee and government-issue cleaning solution. Sarah sat across from Colonel Hayes and two analysts she didn't recognize, a woman with severe glasses and a man who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. Between them sat a laptop streaming encrypted feeds from interrogation rooms throughout the building. Garrison's talking, Hayes said without preamble. But he's claiming limited knowledge. Says he was just facilitating transfers, didn't know what Helix was actually doing with the patients. That's bullshit, Sarah said flatly. I recorded him negotiating extraction timelines and discussing buyer premiums. We know. But his lawyer's already building a defense around plausible deniability. Hayes pulled up a file on the laptop. The problem is Helix Biosolutions. The company exists on paper, but the Virginia address is an empty office suite. Bank accounts traced to shell corporations in 3 different countries. The man you heard talking to Garrison? We can't identify him. No fingerprints in our system. No facial recognition hits. The female analyst leaned forward. Dr. Garrison gave us one name, someone he claims was his primary contact, goes by Lawrence Cade. Ever heard of him? Sarah searched her memory. No, neither had we until 6 hours ago. The analyst pulled up a photograph. Grainy surveillance footage showing a man in his 50s, expensive suit, silver hair. He doesn't exist. No birth certificate, no tax records, no digital footprint before 2019. But in the last 4 years, he's been connected to medical facilities in 7 states. Always legitimate on the surface. Always connected to irregular patient outcomes. He's a coordinator, Sarah said, moving between facilities, establishing networks, then disappearing before anyone notices the pattern. Exactly. And according to Garrison, Cade was planning to expand into 3 more hospitals by the end of the year. Hayes closed the laptop. We're shutting down the Sterling Falls operation, but we haven't touched the network. If we move too fast, everyone else goes underground. Sarah felt exhaustion settling into her bones. What do you need from me? We need you to testify. Grand jury, then trial. Your recordings are critical, but defense attorneys will attack the chain of custody. We need someone credible on the stand who can contextualize what those recordings mean. When? Grand jury convenes in 2 weeks. Trial probably won't start for 6 months. Hayes paused. You'll need to stay in Sterling Falls until then. Witness protection if necessary. Sarah laughed, a short, bitter sound. I just exposed a major criminal conspiracy. You think I can walk around Sterling Falls like nothing happened? We'll provide security. I don't want security. I want a clean exit, like you promised. The male analyst spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly gentle. Miss Mitchell, we understand this isn't what you signed up for, but right now you're the linchpin holding this case together. If you disappear, defense lawyers will argue you're an unstable former military operative with a vendetta. They'll shred your credibility and walk their clients right out of the courtroom. Sarah stared at the table. She'd known this was coming. She'd known the moment she sent those recordings that her quiet life was over. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it viscerally were different things. Fine, she said. But I'm not sitting in a safe house for 6 months. I want to work. Hayes frowned. Work where? You can't go back to Mercy General. Why not? Because it's a crime scene. Because half the staff is under investigation. Because nobody's there to take care of patients, Sarah interrupted. You shut down their trafficking operation? Congratulations. But Mercy General is still the only trauma center for 3 counties. What happens when someone has a heart attack tonight? Where do they go? The room fell silent. We're bringing in temporary administrators, the female analyst said. Joint Task Force is coordinating with state health regulators to keep the facility operational. Then they need nurses, good ones, who know the facility and won't panic when federal agents are still collecting evidence in the basement. Hayes studied her. You want to go back? I want to finish what I started. Those patients didn't ask to be caught in the middle of this. Someone needs to stand in the gap. And you think you're that someone? I know I am. Hayes exchanged glances with the analysts. Finally, he nodded. Okay. But you wear a wire at all times, you report anything unusual, and you accept security escort to and from work. Non-negotiable. Deal. Good. Because there's something else you should know. He pulled up another file. 3 hours ago, someone tried to access your personnel records. Military service history, deployment locations, classified mission parameters. They hit a firewall, but they were using sophisticated tools. Whoever they are, they know you're more than just a nurse, and they're trying to figure out exactly what kind of threat you represent. Sarah's skin went cold. Cade? Presumably, or someone working for him. Either way, they know you're the reason their Sterling Falls operation collapsed, and people who traffic in human organs don't typically forgive that kind of interference. So I'm a target. You were always a target. Now you just know it. Sarah stood, her chair scraping against the floor. Then I guess we'd better catch him before he catches me. They released her at 11 p.m. with a security detail that tried to be discreet and failed miserably. 2 agents in an unmarked sedan followed her Honda back to her apartment, parking directly across the street where anyone with eyes could see them. Inside her apartment, Sarah locked the door and stood in the dark for a long moment. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline finally draining away. She'd been running on combat instincts for 16 hours straight. Now her body was demanding payment. She showered, standing under water hot enough to hurt, and tried to process everything that had happened. This morning she'd been escorted out of Mercy General, like a criminal. Tonight she was a federal witness with armed guards outside her door. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. "Are you okay? Hospital is crazy. Nobody knows what's happening." She typed back, "I'm fine. Stay away from administration. Keep your head down." His response came immediately. "People are saying you're a hero." Sarah deleted the message without responding. Heroes didn't have nightmares about the people they couldn't save. Heroes didn't spend years hiding from their own history. She climbed into bed and closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she started to drift, she saw room 347, the unconscious patient, the man reaching for his weapon. She'd killed him. Clean shoot, justified, but still, she'd ended someone's life for the first time in 5 years. The old training had come back instantly. Sight alignment, trigger control, follow through. Muscle memory didn't care about personal growth or peaceful civilian life. It just executed. Around 2 a.m., she gave up on sleep and made coffee. Through her apartment window, she could see the unmarked sedan, one agent visible in the driver's seat, probably bored out of his mind. Her laptop sat on the kitchen counter. She opened it and did something she'd avoided for 3 years. She searched for her own name. The results were sparse. A few mentions in military medical journals, papers she'd co-authored on combat trauma management. Nothing about her actual deployments, which remained classified. Nothing about the mission that had ended her career. But then she found something new, a forum post on an obscure medical professional's website, dated 2 days ago. "Anyone know Sarah Mitchell, RN at Mercy General in Sterling Falls? Heard some interesting things about her background. Military connections? Just curious." The username was anonymous. The post had no replies. It had been deleted within hours, but Sarah had learned long ago that nothing on the internet truly disappeared. Someone had been fishing for information about her before the raid, before she'd been suspended, which meant someone had been watching her longer than she'd realized. She screenshot the post and emailed it to Hayes. Then she finished her coffee and waited for sunrise. Mercy General Hospital looked different in daylight, with federal vehicles still parked outside. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off the administrative wing and the ICU. Staff members arrived for their shifts looking confused and frightened, clustering in small groups to exchange rumors. Sarah badged in through the emergency entrance at 6 a.m., flanked by Agent Torres and another agent she didn't know. They'd given her a temporary credentials that read, "Federal Consultant" in bold letters. Subtle. The emergency department was understaffed and chaotic. 2 nurses were trying to cover what should have been 6 stations. Dr. Brennan looked like he'd aged a decade overnight, signing orders with shaking hands. When he saw Sarah, he actually looked relieved. "Thank God. We're drowning here. Half the staff called out and—" He stopped, noticing her escorts. "You're really back?" "Temporarily. Where do you need me?" "Everywhere. Trauma Bay has a motorcycle accident. Bay 3 has chest pain. Bay 5 is a pediatric fever that's probably nothing but the parents are terrified. Take your pick." Sarah nodded to her security detail. "Wait here. You can't follow me into patient rooms." Torres frowned. "Our orders are to keep me safe, not violate HIPAA. You can watch the doors. That's it." They didn't like it, but they didn't argue. Sarah grabbed a tablet and dove into the motorcycle accident. The patient was stable but needed surgery, which meant coordinating with an OR team that was probably being interrogated about their role in the trafficking operation. She made calls, pulled strings, and got the patient scheduled within the hour. By 9 a.m., she'd cleared 3 patients and stabilized 2 more. It felt good. Normal. Like her hands remembered what they were supposed to do. Then Marcus found her at the nurse's station, his expression grim. "We need to talk." "Not here." They stepped into an empty supply closet. Marcus locked the door and turned to face her. "Dr. Brennan is under investigation," he said quietly. Federal agents were asking about his schedule, his relationship with Garrison, whether he ever questioned unusual patient transfers. "Was he involved?" "I don't think so. I think he just didn't pay attention. But Sarah, they're investigating everyone, every doctor, every nurse, anyone who might have noticed something and stayed quiet." "Good. They should." "Easy for you to say. You're a federal witness. The rest of us are just trying not to lose our jobs or our licenses." Sarah felt a flash of frustration. "Marcus, people died. 43 people that we know of. If someone on staff knew something and didn't report it, not everyone is you," he interrupted. "Not everyone has military training and classified government contacts. Some of us are just regular people trying to pay rent and student loans. We don't have the luxury of playing hero." The words stung because they were partially true. Sarah had resources and skills most people didn't. Expecting everyone to be willing to sacrifice their career and safety wasn't fair. "You're right," she said. "I'm sorry. I want to believe people would do the right thing if they knew what was at stake. People are scared. Scared of losing everything. Scared of retaliation. There's already talk that anyone connected to the investigation is marked. That Garrison and Voss have connections to people outside who won't let this go quietly." Sarah's instincts prickled. "What kind of people?" "I don't know. Just rumors. But Sarah, you need to be careful. You're the one who brought all this down. If there's blowback, it's coming for you first." He left before she could respond. Sarah stood in the supply closet, surrounded by boxes of medical supplies, and felt the weight of isolation settling over her. She'd done the right thing. She knew that. But right things often came with prices that couldn't be calculated in advance. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You should have stayed quiet." Sarah's pulse spiked. She immediately called Hayes. "Someone just threatened me. Forward the message. We'll trace it." "They'll use burners." "Probably, but we have to try. Are you somewhere secure?" "I'm at the hospital. My detail is outside the supply closet." "Stay with them. I'm sending additional support." A pause. "Mitchell, this is escalating faster than we anticipated. We're getting signals that Cade's network is activating. Multiple secure communications flagged in the last hour. They know we're moving on them." "So what's the play?" "We accelerate the investigation. Grand jury in 3 days instead of 2 weeks. We need your testimony locked in before anyone can interfere. And if they come for me before then, they won't get close. I promise you that." Sarah wanted to believe him, but promises made from behind a desk didn't stop bullets. The rest of her shift passed in tense normalcy. She treated patients, avoided eye contact with staff who were clearly gossiping about her, and tried to ignore the security detail that followed her everywhere. At 2 p.m., a woman arrived in the emergency department complaining of abdominal pain. Standard triage. But when Sarah took her history, something felt wrong. The patient's answers were too vague, her pain descriptions inconsistent. She kept glancing at the exits. "Ma'am, I need you to be honest with me," Sarah said gently. "Are you in danger? Is someone hurting you?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I can't. I shouldn't have come here." "Why not?" "Because they said you'd ask questions. They said you'd know." Sarah felt ice spreading through her chest. "Who said that?" "I don't know his name. He paid me $500 to come here and talk to you. Said I should tell you that Sterling Falls was just the beginning, that people who interfere don't live long enough to testify." Sarah stepped back and immediately signaled to Agent Torres, who'd been watching from the hallway. "This woman needs protection. She's being used as a messenger." Torres moved quickly, speaking into her radio while another agent escorted the woman to a secure room. Dr. Brennan appeared, looking alarmed. "What's happening?" "Potential threat. We need to lock down this department. No one in or out until federal agents clear every person." "You can't be serious." "Do it. Now." The chaos that followed was controlled but unmistakable. Federal agents swept through the emergency department, checking IDs, separating staff from patients, establishing a perimeter. Other patients looked terrified. Sarah couldn't blame them. Hayes arrived within 20 minutes, his expression dark. The woman claimed she was approached in a parking lot this morning. Man in a suit, cash payment, instructions to deliver a verbal message. She ID'd a photo of Lawrence Cade. He's here, in Sterling Falls. Or he was. We're checking every security camera in a 5-mile radius. But Mitchell, he's not trying to hide anymore. He's making a point. That he can get to me. Yes, which means we're moving you tonight. Secure location until the grand jury. Sarah shook her head. I'm not running. That's exactly what he wants. To disrupt the case, create doubt, make me look unstable. He wants you dead. There's a difference. Then catch him before he tries. You have resources. Use them. Hayes studied her for a long moment. You're not going to make this easy, are you? I never do. They didn't move her that night, but they tripled her security detail and relocated her to a hotel room under an alias. Agent Torres stayed in the adjoining room, armed and alert. Sarah lay in an unfamiliar bed, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling, and thought about all the ways this could go wrong. Her phone rang at 3 a.m. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello? Silence, then breathing, slow, deliberate. I know you're listening, Sarah said, so listen carefully. I'm not afraid of you. I've faced worse than organ traffickers in suits, and when this is over, you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. That's not a threat. That's a guarantee. More silence. Then a voice, smooth and cultured, with the faint accent she'd heard on her recording. You're brave. I respect that. But bravery doesn't stop bullets, Miss Mitchell. Or should I say, Major Mitchell. Yes, I know about Somalia. I know about the war crimes tribunal you testified at. I know about the people who died because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. Who are you? Someone who's been doing this much longer than you've been playing detective. Sterling Falls was profitable, but it was also expendable. The network continues. It always continues. People like you think you're heroes, but you're just obstacles. And obstacles get removed. Then why are you calling? If I'm just an obstacle, why waste time talking? A soft laugh. Because I want you to know it's coming. I want you to spend the next 3 days waiting, wondering, looking over your shoulder. Fear is its own kind of torture, and you've earned every second of it. The line went dead. Sarah immediately called Hayes. Cade just called me, threatened me directly. He mentioned Somalia. He what? Hayes sounded fully awake now, adrenaline sharpening his voice. How the hell did he get your number? He has access to classified files, or someone feeding him information who does. I'm sending a tactical team to your location. Pack your things. We're moving you right now. Hayes, that wasn't a request, Mitchell. Someone with access to your classified history is playing for keeps. We're not taking chances anymore. 30 minutes later, Sarah was in an armored SUV with a 6-agent escort, driving through the dark streets of Sterling Falls toward a location they wouldn't tell her. Agent Torres sat beside her, weapon drawn, scanning every shadow. You really pissed someone off, Torres said. Story of my life. They drove for 40 minutes, leaving Sterling Falls behind, heading into rural darkness where streetlights disappeared and trees crowded the road. Sarah's instinct screamed that something was wrong. This didn't feel like a security protocol. This felt like exposure. Where are we going? Safe house, classified location. You'll be secure there until... The explosion lit up the night before the sound reached them. The lead vehicle in their convoy erupted in a fireball that sent metal fragments screaming through the air. Their driver slammed the brakes. The SUV behind them swerved, barely avoiding collision. Ambush, Torres shouted into her radio. We're under attack, all units. Gunfire erupted from the tree line. Automatic weapons, multiple shooters, coordinated and professional. Bullets punched through the SUV's windows, and Sarah threw herself to the floor as glass rained down. The agents returned fire, but they were pinned. More explosions rocked the night, grenades or IEDs. Sarah couldn't tell. She heard screaming, men shouting orders, the distinctive crack of high-powered rifles. Torres dragged her toward the rear door. We have to move, now! They tumbled out of the SUV into chaos. Federal agents were trying to establish a defensive perimeter, but the ambush had been perfectly executed. Multiple attack vectors, overwhelming firepower, zero room to maneuver. Sarah's military training kicked in with brutal clarity. She grabbed a fallen agent's weapon and took cover behind the engine block. "Mitchell, what are you doing?" Torres yelled. "Surviving!" She identified muzzle flashes in the darkness and returned fire with controlled bursts. 3 rounds, slight adjustment, 3 more. One of the shooters went down, then another. But there were too many. And they weren't shooting to arrest. They were shooting to kill. "Fall back," someone shouted. "Fall back to secondary position." They retreated down the road, lane covering fire, dragging wounded agents with them. Sarah moved with them, her weapon empty, her hand shaking with adrenaline. They made it maybe 200 yards before reinforcements arrived. Local police responding to the explosions, their sirens cutting through the gunfire. The attackers melted back into the forest, professional and disciplined, leaving behind 3 dead federal agents and a burning convoy. Sarah collapsed against a police cruiser, breathing hard, her ears ringing from the gunfire. Agent Torres crouched beside her, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead. "You okay?" "Define okay." Torres actually laughed, sharp and bitter. "Fair point." Paramedics arrived. Federal investigators swarmed the scene. Colonel Hayes appeared 20 minutes later, fury and fear competing in his expression. "They knew," he said without preamble. "They knew our route, our timing, our exact position. Someone leaked our security protocols." Sarah met his eyes. "You have a mole." "Yeah, and until we find them, nowhere is safe." Emergency lights strobed across the scene, red and blue painting, the trees, the wreckage, the bodies of agents who'd died protecting a witness they barely knew. Sarah stood slowly, every muscle aching, and stared into the darkness where the shooters had disappeared. Cade had made his move. He'd shown his hand. And now Sarah knew exactly how far he was willing to go. The quiet nurse they'd dismissed as powerless had become the target of an assassination attempt, which meant she was more dangerous to their operation than anyone had realized. But danger, Sarah had learned long ago, cut both ways. And she was just getting started. The temporary command center smelled like burned coffee and stress sweat. Hayes had commandeered a National Guard armory 15 miles outside Sterling Falls, turning it into a fortress overnight. 20 federal agents, local law enforcement liaisons, and military intelligence analysts crowded into a space designed for weekend warriors and equipment storage. Sarah sat in a metal folding chair, wrapped in a shock blanket someone had draped over her shoulders, watching screens display crime scene footage from the ambush. 3 agents dead, 5 wounded, and somewhere in those woods, professional killers had vanished like smoke. The explosive devices were military grade, a bomb tech was explaining to Hayes. C4, remote detonation, professionally placed for maximum damage. Whoever set this up had training, real training. "How many shooters?" Hayes asked. "Minimum 6, maybe 8. Coordinated fire discipline, tactical withdrawal, 0 forensic evidence left behind. These weren't street criminals. These were contractors." Sarah's hands were still shaking slightly. Not from fear, she'd processed that in the minutes after the gunfire stopped, but from the adrenaline crash. Her body knew it had just survived something that should have killed her. "We need to talk about the leak," she said, her voice cutting through the tactical discussion. The room went quiet. Hayes turned to face her. "What makes you think there's a leak?" "Because nobody outside your immediate team knew about that convoy. Nobody. And Cade's people were waiting in exactly the right position with exactly the right equipment at exactly the right time. That's not luck. That's intelligence." "Could be surveillance." "For what? You moved me on 30 minutes' notice from a secure hotel. No way they tracked us organically. Someone told them where we'd be." One of the analysts, a thin man with sharp eyes, spoke up. "She's right. We ran probability models. The chance of that ambush happening without inside information is less than 2%. Hayes' jaw tightened. "Then we have a serious problem, because if someone in this operation is compromised, every move we make puts Mitchell at risk." "Every move puts everyone at risk," Sarah corrected. "But I'm the target, which means I'm also the bait." "No." Hayes shook his head firmly. "We're not using you as bait. It's already happening. Cade is escalating because I'm a threat to his entire network. He can't disappear and rebuild if I'm testifying in 3 days. So he's going to come for me again, harder. And if we're smart, we use that. Agent Torres stepped forward, her forehead now bandaged. You're talking about setting a trap. I'm talking about controlling the battlefield instead of reacting to it. Right now we're playing defense and losing. We need to flip the script. Hayes rubbed his face, exhaustion and frustration evident. Mitchell, you're a witness, not an operator. My job is to keep you alive until you testify, not turn you into some kind of tactical asset. Your job is to dismantle a trafficking network. My testimony helps with that, but catching Cade ends it, and he's not going to expose himself unless he thinks he has a clean shot at eliminating me. The room descended into argument. Some agents agreed with Sarah's logic. Others called it reckless. Hayes stood in the middle, trying to maintain control while clearly grappling with the reality that conventional protection protocols had already failed. Finally, he held up a hand for silence. Here's what we're going to do. Mitchell testifies to the grand jury as scheduled, but we move the location. Federal courthouse in Sterling Falls is too obvious. We'll use a secure facility outside the city, limited access, controlled environment, and we leak false information about our security arrangements through channels we're monitoring. If there's a mole, they'll take the bait. And when Cade's people show up, Torres asked, we'll be ready. Tactical teams, surveillance, the full response. We end this before anyone else dies. Sarah nodded slowly. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than sitting in a bunker waiting for the next attack. One condition, she said. I want a weapon. A real one. If something goes wrong, I'm not dying defenseless. Hayes considered this. You're a civilian witness. I'm a former military officer with combat experience who just returned fire during an ambush and dropped 2 hostiles. Stop treating me like a liability and start treating me like an asset. Their eyes met across the command center. Finally, Hayes nodded. Torres, get her a sidearm and a concealed carry permit. Expedited. They moved her again at dawn, this time to a rural property that belonged to someone important enough that nobody asked questions. It was a farmhouse with good sightlines, a single access road, and enough space for a defensive perimeter. Sarah spent the day reviewing her testimony with a federal prosecutor named Janet Kellerman, a woman in her 40s who looked like she'd prosecuted organized crime before breakfast every morning for 20 years. Your recordings are solid, Kellerman said, reviewing transcripts on her tablet. But defense attorneys are going to attack your credibility. They'll paint you as a vigilante, someone with an agenda against hospital administration. Let them try. They'll also bring up your military service, dig into any disciplinary actions, controversial missions, reasons you left the service. Are there skeletons in that closet? Sarah thought about Somalia, about the operation that had gone wrong, about the people who died because intelligence was bad and command decisions were worse. Nothing that disqualifies me as a witness. That's not a no. It's the best answer you're getting. My service record is classified. Defense attorneys can insinuate whatever they want. They can't prove anything. Kellerman studied her. You're tougher than most witnesses I work with. That's good. You'll need to be. They worked for hours, going over every detail of the trafficking operation, every piece of evidence, every connection between Garrison and Helix Biosolutions. By late afternoon, Sarah could recite her testimony in her sleep. That's when Hayes pulled her aside. We intercepted communications. Someone in Sterling Falls made contact with a known associate of Lawrence Cade 2 hours ago. They're planning something for tomorrow. The grand jury, probably. We're moving up the timeline. You testify at 8 a.m. That gives them less time to coordinate. Or it forces them to move recklessly, which means mistakes. That's what I'm counting on. Hayes handed her a file. This is everything we know about Cade's network. Faces, names, known associates. Study it. If you see anyone suspicious tomorrow, you signal Torres immediately. Sarah flipped through the file. 12 people with photos and brief bios. Most were unremarkable, middle-aged men in business attire, the kind of people who blended into corporate environments. But one photo stopped her cold. This woman, who is she? Amanda Price, former pharmaceutical sales rep, current person of interest. She's been linked to medical facilities in 4 states where Helix operated. Why? Because I've seen her, at Mercy General. She came through the ER about a month ago, claimed she was having chest pains. We ran tests. Everything came back normal. She left. Hayes leaned closer. You're sure it's her? Positive. She spent 3 hours in the department, had access to staff areas, computer terminals. I remember because she asked a lot of questions about hospital security protocols. Said her father was a patient there and she was concerned about safety. She was casing the facility. Looks like it. Hayes immediately got on his radio, barking orders to pull security footage from that date. Cross-reference visitor logs. Identify any data breaches or unauthorized access during Price's visit. Sarah stared at the photo. She's the leak, not someone in your agency, someone who infiltrated the hospital weeks ago and has been feeding information to Cade ever since. If that's true, she knows we're looking for her now, which means she'll run or she'll accelerate whatever they're planning. Hayes' expression turned grim. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be long. But rest didn't come easily. Sarah lay in an unfamiliar bed in an unfamiliar house, listening to security patrols outside and thinking about Amanda Price, about how easy it had been for someone to walk into a hospital, gather intelligence, and disappear back into a criminal network that spanned multiple states. How many other Amanda Prices were out there? How many facilities were compromised without anyone noticing? Around 2 a.m., she gave up on sleep and went downstairs. Agent Torres was in the kitchen, drinking coffee and monitoring security feeds on a laptop. Can't sleep either? Torres asked. Too much adrenaline still in my system. Yeah, that ambush was intense. You handled yourself well. Training doesn't disappear, even when you want it to. Torres poured a second cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. Hayes told me about your service record. He didn't give details, but he said you've seen combat. Real combat. Some. Must be strange coming back to civilian life. Working as a nurse. Seems like a big shift. It was supposed to be quiet. Boring even. Turns out I'm not good at boring. Torres smiled slightly. Most people who've done what we do aren't. The quiet feels wrong after a while, like waiting for something bad to happen. They sat in silence for a moment, two people who'd survived violence and understood its aftermath. Can I ask you something? Sarah said. When you signed up for this job, did you think it would matter? Like really matter? Every day. Why? Because right now, it feels like we're fighting something that just regenerates. We shut down Sterling Falls, but Cade's network keeps operating. We arrest one coordinator, another one pops up. At what point do we admit we're just putting Band-Aids on a bullet wound? Torres set down her coffee cup. You want the honest answer? We probably won't destroy the entire network. These operations are too distributed, too profitable, too connected to people with resources and protection. But we can disrupt it, make it harder, save the people we can save. That has to be enough, because it's all we've got. And if it's not enough, then we keep fighting anyway, because the alternative is giving up, and I'm not wired that way. I don't think you are either. Sarah thought about the 43 victims, about the people who disappeared into the machinery of trafficking and exploitation, about Marcus and the other hospital staff who were just trying to survive without becoming complicit. No, she said quietly. I'm not. But they left for the federal facility at 6 a.m., using 3 vehicles in a rotating pattern designed to confuse surveillance. Sarah wore body armor under her clothes and carried the Glock 19 Torres had issued her the previous day. It felt heavy and familiar against her hip. The facility was a nondescript government building 30 miles from Sterling Falls, surrounded by fencing and security checkpoints. Grand jury proceedings happened in a windowless room on the 3rd floor, sterile and formal, designed to strip away any drama and focus on facts. Janet Kellerman met Sarah in a preparation room. You ready? As I'll ever be. Good. Remember, just answer the questions. Don't speculate, don't offer opinions, stick to what you saw and heard. The recordings speak for themselves. Sarah nodded. They walked to the grand jury room together. Hayes and Torres flanked them, along with 4 other agents forming a security cordon. Every face they passed was checked against the file from last night. No sign of Amanda Price or anyone else on the watch list. The grand jury consisted of 16 people who looked tired and confused about why they'd been summoned for an emergency session. The prosecutor, a different one from Kellerman, someone senior, began with opening remarks about the scope of the investigation. Then Sarah took the stand. For 90 minutes, she walked them through everything. The missing patients, the phantom admissions, the conversation she'd overheard between Garrison and the Helix representative, The recordings played in the silent room, Garrison's voice echoing off walls as he discussed candidates and extraction timelines. Some of the jurors looked sick, others looked angry. One woman was crying quietly. When it was over, the prosecutor thanked Sarah and dismissed her. She walked out of the room feeling lighter somehow, as if she'd set down a weight she'd been carrying since that first night in the ICU. Hayes met her in the hallway. "You did good. The prosecutor says they'll vote to indict within the hour. So it's over. The grand jury part is, but..." An alarm cut through the building. Not a fire alarm, something else. A security breach alert, harsh and insistent. Hayes's radio exploded with traffic. "Perimeter breach, south entrance, multiple hostiles. Need backup now." Torres grabbed Sarah's arm. "We need to move, now." They ran down the hallway toward a secondary stairwell. Behind them, they could hear shouting, the crash of doors being forced open, the unmistakable sound of suppressed gunfire. "They're inside," Hayes said into his radio. "All units converge on the grand jury room. Protect the witnesses." They reached the stairwell and started down. Sarah's training kicked in. Check corners, watch for ambush points, maintain spacing between targets. They made it to the second-floor landing before they ran into them. Two men in tactical gear, moving up the stairs with weapons raised. Professional, efficient, prepared for resistance. Hayes fired first. One man went down. Torres engaged the second, forcing him back around the corner. Sarah pulled her Glock and added suppressing fire, her shots echoing in the concrete stairwell. "Keep moving," Hayes shouted. They continued down, but the ground floor was chaos. More hostiles had breached the building, engaging federal agents in a running gunfight through offices and hallways. This wasn't a targeted assassination. This was an assault designed to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. "They're trying to reach the grand jury," Torres realized. "If they kill the jurors, they erase the indictment," Sarah finished. "And Garrison's people walk." Hayes made a decision. "Torres, get Mitchell to the parking garage. Extract her from the facility. I'm going back up." "Colonel, that's an order. Go!" Torres pulled Sarah toward a side corridor. Behind them, Hayes was rallying agents, organizing a defensive line, buying them time to escape. They burst into the parking garage and ran for the vehicles. Torres had her keys out, hitting the unlock button. A figure stepped from behind a concrete pillar. Amanda Price, wearing business casual and holding a pistol with the confidence of someone who'd used one before. "Stop!" Torres started to raise her weapon. Price shot her twice in the chest. Torres went down hard, body armor catching the rounds, but the impact knocking her unconscious. Sarah dove behind a parked car, returning fire, forcing Price into cover. "You should have stayed quiet," Price called out. "You should have just taken your suspension and walked away, but you had to be a hero." "I had to stop people from dying," Sarah shouted back. "People die every day. It's just business, supply and demand. We provide a service, you murder vulnerable people and sell their organs. We provide opportunities for people with resources to extend their lives. There's a difference." Sarah moved between cars, trying to flank Price's position. "Where's Cade?" "Somewhere you'll never reach. He doesn't get his hands dirty. That's what people like me are for." Sarah spotted Price's reflection in a car window. She was moving, trying to get an angle on Torres's unconscious form, probably planning to execute her and remove a witness. Sarah made her choice. She stepped out from cover, weapon raised, center mass sight picture. Price turned, bringing her own weapon up. They fired simultaneously. Sarah felt something punch her left shoulder, spinning her backward. But her shots hit true. 2 rounds center mass, one more as Price fell. Amanda Price collapsed against a concrete pillar and didn't move. Sarah staggered to Torres, pain radiating from her shoulder. The bullet had gone through muscle, missing bone, but leaving a ragged wound that was bleeding heavily. She pressed her right hand against it, trying to slow the blood loss, and used her left to check Torres's pulse. Still alive. Unconscious, but alive. Sarah's vision was starting to blur. Shock, blood loss, adrenaline dump, all hitting simultaneously. She tried to key her radio, but her hands weren't working properly. Footsteps echoed through the parking garage. Multiple people approaching fast. Sarah raised her weapon with shaking hands, ready to fight until she couldn't anymore. But it was Hayes, leading a team of federal agents, weapons drawn but finding only the aftermath. "Mitchell!" He ran to her side. Jesus, you're hit! Shoulder. Torres took 2 to the vest. Price is down. Medic, Hayes shouted. We need medics here now. Sarah's legs gave out. Hayes caught her, lowering her to the ground gently. Above them, the alarm was still blaring, but the gunfire had stopped. Did they reach the grand jury? Sarah asked, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. No, we held them off. The jurors are safe. Good. That's good. Paramedics arrived, cutting away her jacket, applying pressure to the wound. Someone was talking about blood pressure and field dressings and immediate transport. Sarah looked at Hayes through graying vision. Cade, you have to find him. We will. Promise me. Promise me he doesn't walk away from this. Hayes gripped her hand. I promise. Now stop talking and let these people save your life. Darkness was creeping in at the edges of Sarah's awareness. She'd been shot before, in Somalia, and remembered this feeling, the body shutting down non-essential systems, conserving energy, preparing for survival or shutdown. She thought about Torres, unconscious but alive, about Hayes, promising to finish what they'd started, about the grand jury upstairs, ready to indict based on testimony she'd given despite everything thrown at her. She thought about Marcus and the other hospital staff trying to heal in a broken system. She thought about 43 people who'd disappeared and would never get justice, but whose deaths might at least mean something now. As the paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher, Sarah heard one of the agents speaking into a radio. Price is deceased. Mitchell critical but stable. Still no sign of primary target. Cade was still out there. The network was still operating. And somewhere in Sterling Falls or beyond, plans were already being made to continue operations, to rebuild what had been disrupted, to silence anyone who threatened the business model. The last thing Sarah saw before unconsciousness took her was Hayes standing over Amanda Price's body, his expression carved from stone, already planning his next move in a war that wouldn't end with one battle. In her fading awareness, Sarah understood something she'd been avoiding since this started. They could win today and tomorrow and next week, arrest every person connected to the Sterling Falls operation, dismantle Helix Biosolutions completely, and Lawrence Cade would still be out there, building another network, finding another hospital, creating another pipeline where vulnerable people disappeared into darkness, unless someone stopped him permanently. As darkness finally claimed her, Sarah's last conscious thought was simple and cold. When she woke up, she was going hunting. Sarah woke to the smell of antiseptic and the steady beep of a heart monitor. Her left shoulder was wrapped in enough bandages to immobilize a small limb, and an IV drip fed clear fluid into her right arm. The room was private, windowless, and guarded. She could see the shadow of boots beneath the door frame. Her mouth tasted like copper and regret. You're awake. Hayes sat in a chair beside the bed, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Probably hadn't. Doctors said you'd be out for at least 12 hours. You made it in 8, Sarah's voice came out rough. Torres? Concussion and bruised ribs. She'll recover, already complaining about being benched. The grand jury voted to indict Garrison, Voss, Reeves, and 6 others connected to the Sterling Falls operation. Federal charges, state charges, enough paper to bury them for lifetimes. Hayes leaned forward. You did it, Mitchell. Your testimony locked it down. Sarah closed her eyes. Victory should have felt better. Cade? The silence that followed told her everything. We lost him, Hayes admitted. By the time we secured the federal building and processed the assault team, he was gone. Private airstrip 40 miles north had a charter flight depart 30 minutes after the attack ended. Filed flight plan to Montreal, but Canadian authorities found the plane abandoned at a regional airport. No passengers, no crew, no trail. He planned the escape before the attack even started. Yes, which means he knew it might fail, but considered eliminating witnesses worth the risk anyway. Hayes pulled out a tablet and showed her crime scene photos. Bodies in tactical gear, weapons, communications equipment. We identified 5 of the assault team, all former military contractors, worked for private security firms with questionable client lists, but none of them can tell us anything about Cade's location or his network infrastructure, because they're professionals. They operate in cells, compartmentalized information, zero knowledge beyond their immediate mission parameters. Exactly, which leaves us with a trafficking network that's disrupted but not destroyed, and a coordinator who's proven he can mobilize lethal force on American soil with 48 hours' notice. Sarah tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her shoulder, sharp enough to make her gasp. Hayes moved to help, but she waved him off. How long do I have to stay here? Hospital wants you for at least 3 days. Gunshot wounds to major muscle groups require monitoring for infection, nerve damage. I didn't ask what the hospital wants. I asked how long I'm staying. Hayes studied her. You're planning something. I'm planning to finish what I started. Cade thinks he won because he escaped. He thinks the assault on the federal building will make witnesses terrified to testify, that his network can just relocate and rebuild somewhere else. He's wrong. Mitchell, you're a witness who just survived 2 assassination attempts. You're not an active operator. My job is to protect you until trial, not enable whatever revenge fantasy. This isn't revenge. It's tactics. Sarah met his eyes. Cade made a mistake. He showed us his network infrastructure when he mobilized that assault team. Communications, logistics, coordination, all of that leaves traces. Digital footprints, financial transactions. We just need to know where to look. We've been looking. The FBI's been looking. Cade's network operates through layers of corporate shells and encrypted channels that can be penetrated if you have someone who understands how covert operations actually work. Sarah paused. You said you wanted me to be an asset instead of just a witness. Now's your chance to mean it. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the door, spoke briefly with whoever was guarding it, and returned with a laptop. Against my better judgment, he said, setting the computer on the adjustable tray over Sarah's bed. You have access to our case files, financial forensics, and communication intercepts, but you're doing this from a hospital bed under armed guard, and the second your doctors say you need rest, I'm pulling the plug. Understood? Understood. He left her alone with the laptop and 3 days of forced convalescence. Sarah spent the first 12 hours rebuilding the network map in her head. Helix Biosolutions was the front company, but behind it were 6 subsidiary corporations, each registered in different states with different ownership structures. Money flowed through them like water through nested pipes, clean on entry, impossible to trace at the exit, but money always left traces if you knew what to look for. She started with the assault team. 5 dead contractors, all paid through a private security firm called Sentinel Risk Management. That company's client list was confidential, but their banking records showed regular payments from a corporation called Meridian Health Logistics. Meridian's ownership led to another shell company. That shell company connected to a medical supply distributor. The distributor had contracts with 11 hospitals across 7 states. Sarah mapped it all out, building a web of connections that showed the scope of Cade's operation. Sterling Falls had been just one node. The network was vast, sophisticated, and still operational. On the second day, Janet Kellerman visited. You look terrible, the prosecutor said without preamble. Shot twice in 3 days will do that. The trial's been moved up. Federal judge wants to strike while public attention is high and before defense attorneys can muddy the waters. We're looking at 6 weeks instead of 6 months. Good. Faster is better. Kellerman sat down, her expression serious. I need to prepare you for what's coming. Garrison's legal team is top tier. They're going to attack everything, your credibility, your mental state, your military record. They've already filed motions to exclude your testimony on grounds of bias and procedural irregularities. Let them. They're also going to paint you as a vigilante, someone who manufactured evidence to support a personal grudge against hospital administration. They'll argue that you're unstable, that your combat experience left you paranoid and prone to seeing conspiracies where none exist. Sarah looked at Kellerman directly. Will any of that work? Not if you don't give them ammunition, which means no unauthorized investigations, no contact with suspects or witnesses, no actions that could be construed as obstruction or witness tampering. You need to be the perfect victim, sympathetic, traumatized, just trying to do the right thing. That's not who I am. I know, but it's who you need to be in court if we're going to win this. Kellerman stood. The grand jury indictments are sealed until the defendants are arraigned next week. After that, this becomes public. Media circus, national attention, people picking sides. Are you ready for that? Sarah thought about her quiet life 3 weeks ago. Overnight shifts where nobody noticed her. Apartment where she could disappear into anonymity. No, she admitted, but I'll handle it anyway. After Kellerman left, Sarah went back to the laptop. She was missing something, some connection that would reveal not just the network, but Cade himself. She found it in the medical supply contracts. Every hospital connected to Meridian Health Logistics had received shipments of specialized surgical equipment over the past 2 years. Equipment designed for organ preservation and transport. Equipment that was far more sophisticated than what most regional hospitals would normally stock. And all of it had been ordered by the same person, a procurement specialist named Robert Davenport. Sarah ran Davenport's credentials. Medical degree from a legitimate university, 20 years of hospital administration experience, currently listed as working for a consulting firm that advised medical facilities on supply chain optimization. She pulled up his photo from a professional networking site, and there he was. Lawrence Cade. Older, with different hair and glasses, but the same man from the surveillance footage Hayes had shown her. Cade hadn't just coordinated the network, he'd embedded himself in it, working under an assumed identity that gave him legitimate access to hospitals, medical records, and procurement systems. Sarah called Hayes immediately. "I found him," was it. Within 2 hours, her hospital room was crowded with federal agents and analysts. Hayes stood over the laptop, reviewing her findings with an expression that moved from skepticism to grim satisfaction. "Robert Davenport has been operating in plain sight for 4 years, one of the analysts confirmed. Legitimate credentials, real consulting contracts, regular tax filings. He's been building this network while pretending to help hospitals improve efficiency." "Current location?" Hayes demanded. "Last known address is Phoenix, Arizona, but that's from 3 months ago. No credit card activity, no travel records since the assault on the federal building." "He's running," Torres said from the doorway. She was back on duty despite medical advice, one arm in a sling, determination written across her bruised face. "He knows we identified Amanda Price's body, knows we'll trace her connections back to him eventually. He's burning the network and disappearing. Then we move fast." Hayes started issuing orders. FBI field offices in all 7 states with connected hospitals. "We hit them simultaneously, arrest everyone connected to the procurement scheme, freeze all accounts linked to Meridian and its subsidiaries. And we put Davenport's face on every law enforcement database in North America." "He'll see it coming," Sarah said. "The moment you start coordinating with multiple field offices, someone will leak. Deliberately or accidentally, doesn't matter. He'll know." "Then what do you suggest?" Sarah pulled up a file she'd been building. 3 of the 11 hospitals are still actively receiving shipments from Meridian. 2 of them already have federal attention after Sterling Falls, but 1 doesn't. Memorial Regional in Ashford, Kentucky. Small city, low-profile facility, no current investigations. If Cade needs to extract 1 more high-value donor to fund his disappearance, that's where he'd go. Hayes frowned. "That's a lot of assumptions. It's probability based on operational patterns. Cade works fast but methodically. He won't abandon a revenue stream unless absolutely necessary. And right now we haven't publicly connected Memorial Regional to anything. To him, it looks clean. Or it's a trap. He could be waiting for us to show up somewhere predictable so he can finish what he started. Then we give him what he expects and hit him with what he doesn't." Torres stepped forward. "You want to use yourself as bait again. I want to end this. The trial puts Garrison and his people away, but Cade rebuilds somewhere else. We need to take him down physically, publicly, in a way that destroys his network's credibility and scares off anyone thinking about rebuilding." Hayes shook his head. "You're still recovering from a gunshot wound. You're not cleared for field operations. I'm cleared to consult. Put me in a surveillance van. Let me coordinate from a distance. But we need to move now, before he goes completely underground." The room erupted in argument. Some agents thought it was reckless. Others saw the logic. Hayes stood in the middle, clearly torn between protecting a witness and stopping a trafficker who'd already killed federal agents. Finally, he made a decision. "We do this quiet. Small team, no field office coordination, no electronic communications that can be intercepted. Torres, Mitchell, myself, and 6 tactical operators. We insert into Ashford tomorrow, establish surveillance on Memorial Regional, and wait. If Cade shows, we take him. If not, we pull back and try something else." "What about my medical clearance?" Sarah asked. "Discharge yourself against medical advice. Sign whatever waivers they want. But if you slow us down in the field, I'm leaving you in the van." Sarah nodded. "Fair enough." Well, she left the hospital that night, shoulder still throbbing but functional enough. They drove through darkness toward Kentucky. 3 vehicles moving independently, maintaining radio silence until they reached Ashford. The city was smaller than Sterling Falls, built around a defunct coal industry that had left economic scars and population decline. Memorial Regional Hospital served 6 rural counties, understaffed and overwhelmed, exactly the kind of place Cade could exploit. They established surveillance in an abandoned industrial building across from the hospital, setting up cameras and monitoring equipment. Sarah sat at a laptop while Torres and Hayes coordinated tactical positioning. Davenport, or Cade, or whatever he's calling himself, made a call 3 hours ago, an analyst reported through their secure channel. Burner phone, brief conversation, but we triangulated it to within 2 miles of Ashford. He's here. Do we have eyes on him? Hayes asked. Negative. But we flagged unusual activity at Memorial Regional. Someone accessed their patient database remotely an hour ago using administrator credentials. They were searching admission records for specific patient profiles. Single, no family, recent intake. Sarah felt ice in her chest. He's shopping, looking for his next victim. 2 patients matched the profile, the analyst continued. One is a 58-year-old male recovering from a car accident. The other is a 42-year-old female admitted yesterday with complications from diabetes. Which room? Sarah asked. Male patient is in 412. Female patient is in 307. Hayes made the call. We place undercover agents in both rooms. If anyone approaches those patients outside normal hospital protocols, we intercept. Torres, coordinate with local PD for backup, but keep it quiet. Tell them it's a federal operation. Need to know only. The next 6 hours were tense waiting. Hospital staff came and went on normal schedules. Patients were treated. Nothing unusual appeared on surveillance. Then at 2:47 a.m., a figure entered through the hospital's service entrance. Male, 50s, wearing scrubs and a surgical mask, carrying a medical bag. He moved with purpose toward the 4th floor. That's him, Sarah said, recognizing the build and movement pattern from footage she'd studied. Room 412. Hayes activated his radio. All units, target is moving to 4th floor. Intercept quietly. We want him alive. The agents moved into position, coordinating through hand signals and silent communication. The man in scrubs entered room 412, closed the door. 30 seconds later, Hayes and Torres breached the room with weapons drawn. Federal agents, hands where we can see them. The man turned slowly. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a syringe filled with clear liquid. Lawrence Cade, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, human trafficking, and about 30 other charges we'll explain at length. Cade set the syringe down carefully on the bedside table. The patient in the bed was unconscious, sedated, completely unaware of how close he'd come to disappearing. I want a lawyer, Cade said calmly. You'll get one, after we process you at the federal building. Torres moved forward with handcuffs. That's when Sarah noticed something wrong. Cade was too calm, too composed for someone caught in the act. Wait, she said into her radio. Something's off. Check the service entrance, check for... The explosion shook the building. Not inside the hospital, outside in the parking lot, where their surveillance vehicles were positioned. Secondary blasts followed, systematic and coordinated, taking out their transportation and communication equipment. It's a counter-ambush, Sarah realized. He knew we'd be here. He wanted us here. More figures appeared in the hospital corridors. Not hospital staff. Armed men moving with tactical precision, cutting off exits, herding federal agents into kill zones. Hayes's radio erupted with panicked transmissions. Under fire, 3rd floor. Multiple hostiles. Civilians in crossfire. Cade smiled behind his mask. You thought you were hunting me. How naive. Torres hit him hard enough to break his nose, then zip-tied his hands behind his back. Hayes, we need extraction now. Working on it. Mitchell, status? Sarah was already moving, abandoning the surveillance post, heading toward the hospital. Her shoulder screamed protest, but she ignored it. If Cade had set a trap, it meant innocent patients were in danger. She entered through the emergency department, weapon drawn, moving on pure training. The ED was chaos, staff trying to evacuate patients while gunfire echoed from upper floors. She found Marcus near the triage desk, helping an elderly patient into a wheelchair. Sarah? What the hell is happening? Get everyone to the ground floor and out through the ambulance bay. Move now. There are people upstairs who can't move on their own. I'll get them. You handle evacuation. She didn't wait for his response. She ran for the stairs. taking them two at a time despite the pain. Third floor was where the heaviest gunfire had been reported. She found two federal agents pinned down by three hostiles at the end of a corridor. Patient rooms lined both sides, people trapped inside, terrified. Sarah flanked the hostiles through a parallel hallway, came up behind them, and dropped two before they registered her presence. The third turned, but the federal agents hit him from the front. "Get these patients moving," Sarah ordered. "I'll clear the floor." She went room to room, helping mobile patients into the hallway, coordinating with nursing staff to move critical patients on gurneys. The hospital was evacuating in controlled chaos, people flooding toward exits while gunfire still echoed through the building. On the fourth floor, she found Hayes defending room 412 with Cade secured and unconscious. Torres had apparently decided to sedate him rather than let him become a bargaining chip. "Building's nearly clear," Sarah reported. "Local PD is setting up a perimeter outside. Hostiles are withdrawing or repositioning. We need to move now before..." Another explosion, this one inside the building. Someone had rigged charges in the administrative wing, probably destroying records, evidence, anything that could connect Cade's network to Memorial Regional. The ceiling above them cracked. Dust and debris rained down. "Go!" Hayes shouted. They dragged Cade's unconscious form down the stairs, through the emergency department, out into the cold night air where ambulances and police vehicles had established a perimeter. Behind them, Memorial Regional Hospital burned. Not the entire building, just specific sections. Targeted destruction designed to eliminate evidence while creating enough chaos to cover an escape. But this time, they had the prize. Lawrence Cade, sedated and handcuffed, loaded into a federal vehicle with enough security to transport a war criminal. Sarah collapsed against an ambulance, her shoulder bleeding through the bandages, exhaustion and pain finally overwhelming adrenaline. Torres appeared beside her. "You okay?" Define okay. "Fair point. Again." Torres smiled slightly. "You know, for someone who just wanted to be a quiet nurse, you're really bad at staying out of trouble. Story of my life." Hayes joined them, soot-streaked and exhausted. "We got him. Cade's in custody. His assault team scattered, and we evacuated that hospital without losing a single civilian. That's a win." "Is it?" Sarah looked at the burning building. "How many other hospitals are connected to his network? How many other coordinators are out there right now, watching this on the news and making plans to avoid the same mistakes? That's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, we stopped a trafficking operation and arrested the man running it. Take the win, Mitchell." Sarah wanted to. She wanted to believe that arresting Cade would end the nightmare, that justice would be served, that the people who disappeared would somehow matter because their killer was finally caught. But she'd seen too much to believe in clean endings. They transported Cade to a secure federal facility and began the interrogation process. He lawyered up immediately, refused to answer questions, maintained the composure of someone who'd planned for this contingency. But his arrest triggered a cascade effect through his network. Federal agents hit all 11 hospitals simultaneously, arresting procurement specialists, administrators, and medical staff connected to the trafficking operation. Financial institutions froze accounts. International partners scrambled to distance themselves. Within 48 hours, the network was in pieces. Sarah spent that time in debriefings, giving statements, walking prosecutors through evidence until her voice went hoarse. She slept in fits and starts, always waking when the pain medication wore off, and her shoulder reminded her of prices paid. On the third day after Cade's arrest, Hayes found her in a conference room reviewing case files. "You should be resting." "I'm fine." "You're not. You've been shot twice, nearly killed 3 times, and you look like you haven't slept in a week." He sat down across from her. "The trial starts in 4 weeks. Garrison's team is already filing motions, trying to separate his case from the others, arguing that he was just a hospital administrator who made poor judgment calls. That won't work. We have recordings. We have evidence. But trials aren't just about evidence. They're about narratives. And right now, defense attorneys are building a narrative where you're an unstable vigilante who destroyed a hospital's reputation based on paranoid suspicions. Then we build a better narrative. That's exactly what I'm saying. But to do that, you need to be credible, composed, and sympathetic, not running on fumes and rage. Hayes leaned forward. "Take a break. 2 weeks? Get medical treatment, physical therapy, sleep. Let us handle the prosecution prep." Sarah wanted to argue, but her body was screaming that he was right. "Fine, 2 weeks. But I want daily updates on the case. Done. She left the federal facility and checked into a hotel under an alias. For the first time in 3 weeks, she was alone without armed guards, without surveillance equipment, without the weight of an investigation pressing down on her. She slept for 16 hours straight. When she woke, her phone had 7 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. No messages, just persistent attempts to reach her. She called back, "Miss Mitchell?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional, neutral. "My name is Director Teresa Walsh. I oversee special investigations for the Department of Justice. We need to talk about Lawrence Cade." "He's in custody. What's left to talk about?" "That's the problem. 3 hours ago, during a routine transfer between facilities, the transport vehicle was ambushed. 2 federal agents are dead, and Lawrence Cade is gone." Sarah didn't hang up. She stood in her hotel room, staring at her reflection in the dark window, and felt something cold settle into her bones. Not fear, not shock, just a kind of exhausted clarity that came from watching the same disaster repeat itself endlessly. "How?" she asked. "Professionally executed operation. 3 vehicles blocked the transport route, military-grade smoke grenades, suppressed weapons fire. The ambush team extracted Cade and disappeared within 90 seconds. No witnesses, no recoverable forensics, no trail. He had help from inside. Someone told them the route, the timing, the security protocols." Director Walsh was quiet for a moment. "That's the working theory, which brings me to why I'm calling you. We need to bring you in. Protective custody until we identify the leak, and no. Miss Mitchell, you're a critical witness to multiple federal prosecutions. With Cade free, you're in immediate danger." "I'm already in danger. I've been in danger since the moment I reported those missing patients. Protective custody didn't stop him before. It won't stop him now." Sarah picked up her jacket, checking the weight of the Glock still holstered at her hip. "But I can." "You're suggesting what exactly? That we let a civilian witness hunt down an escaped federal prisoner?" "I'm suggesting you stop treating me like a civilian who needs protection and start treating me like someone who's already survived everything Cade could throw at her, twice." "That's not how this works." "Then change how it works. Because your way got 2 more agents killed and put a trafficking coordinator back in the wind. My way at least has a chance of ending this." Walsh exhaled slowly. "You sound like Colonel Hayes. He said you'd react this way." "Hayes knows I'm right. Hayes is also officially barred from this investigation pending an internal review of how Cade escaped custody, which means I'm in charge now. And I don't know you, Miss Mitchell. I don't know if you're an asset or a liability." Sarah grabbed her laptop and car keys. "Then let me prove it. Give me 48 hours. If I haven't delivered actionable intelligence on Cade's location, I'll turn myself over to protective custody voluntarily. And if you get yourself killed, then you'll have 1 less witness to protect and 1 more funeral to attend. Seems like you're familiar with those." The line was silent for several seconds. Then Walsh spoke again, her voice carrying a different quality, something harder, more calculating. 48 hours. But you don't go dark. You check in every 6 hours, you share any intelligence you develop, and you do not engage Cade directly without federal backup. Those are non-negotiable terms." "Agreed." "And Mitchell? Hayes also said you were the best combat medic he ever worked with, that you saved more lives in worse situations than most people see in lifetimes. Don't make him a liar by getting yourself killed over pride." Sarah almost smiled. "I'll do my best." She hung up and immediately called Torres, who answered on the first ring. "You heard? Everyone heard. The FBI's in panic mode. Hayes is threatening to quit, and half the task force thinks there's a mole in the Justice Department." Torres paused. "Are you okay?" "Define okay." "3rd time you've said that to me. Getting predictable." "Where are you?" "Standing outside your hotel. Hayes figured you'd try something stupid, so he asked me to stop you. Or help you. He wasn't specific about which." Sarah looked out the window and saw Torres leaning against a sedan in the parking lot, phone to her ear. "How'd you find me?" "You're not the only one who knows how to track people. Come down. We need to talk before you do whatever insane thing you're planning." 5 minutes later, they sat in Torres's car while rain started to fall, drumming against the windshield. "Cade had this planned from the beginning," Torres said. "The arrest at Memorial Regional was too easy. He wanted us to catch him so he could identify all the players involved in the investigation, map our procedures, and plan an extraction. which means he needed someone on the inside feeding him information the whole time. Right, and that someone is still active, still has access, and is probably reporting everything we do directly to Cade. Torres pulled up a file on her tablet. Before Hayes got benched, he asked me to run background on everyone with access to Cade's transport logistics. I found something interesting. She showed Sarah personnel files. 3 federal marshals, 2 FBI agents, and 1 DOJ analyst had all accessed the transport route within 12 hours of the ambush. The analyst, Sarah said immediately. What's her background? Margaret Sutton. 15 years with justice, stellar record, security clearances, no red flags. Too clean. Nobody's that clean. Sarah studied Sutton's photo, a woman in her early 40s with the kind of face that disappeared in crowds. Run her financials, look for anything unusual, large deposits, foreign accounts, anything that doesn't match her salary. Torres worked her tablet for several minutes. Nothing obvious, but she did take 3 extended vacations in the past year to cities where Cade's network was operating: Phoenix, Memphis, Portland. Business or personal? Filed as personal. She claimed she was visiting family, but the timing overlaps with when Helix Biosolutions was establishing operations in those cities. Sarah felt the pieces clicking together. She's not just a leak, she's a recruiter. Someone Cade placed inside Justice years ago to identify vulnerable systems, potential corruption points, places where his network could expand without detection. If that's true, she knows we're looking at her. She'll run. Or she'll lead us to Cade. Either way, we need to move now. Torres started the engine. Where does Sutton live? Arlington, Virginia. But she won't be there. If she helped Cade escape, she's already relocating to wherever he's hiding. Then we need leverage, something that forces her to make contact with him. Sarah thought for a moment. The trial. Garrison's arraignment is tomorrow morning, Sterling Falls. It's supposed to be the first domino. Once he goes public with his defense, other people connected to the network start making deals to save themselves. Cade can't afford that. So we leak that Garrison's considering cooperating with prosecutors. Make it look like he's ready to give up Cade's identity and network infrastructure in exchange for a reduced sentence. Sutton will report that to Cade immediately, and Cade will have to respond. He can't let Garrison testify. Torres nodded slowly. We're using Garrison as bait. We're using reality as bait. Garrison's lawyers are already floating cooperation deals. We just accelerate the timeline and make sure the right people hear about it. And if Cade sends another assault team, then we'll be ready, because this time we choose the battlefield. Bob. They drove through the night to Sterling Falls, coordinating with Janet Kellerman and the remaining members of Hayes' team who hadn't been pulled into the internal investigation. By dawn, they'd established a plan. The arraignment would proceed as scheduled at the Sterling Falls courthouse, but with modifications. Garrison would be transported in an armored vehicle with full tactical escort. The courthouse would have federal agents positioned at every entrance, snipers on surrounding rooftops, and a no-fly zone enforced overhead. But they'd also leak information through channels they knew Sutton was monitoring. False security protocols, fake transport routes, breadcrumbs designed to lead Cade into a kill zone. Sarah positioned herself in a building across from the courthouse, watching through a sniper scope. She wasn't cleared to shoot. She was technically still a civilian witness, but Torres had given her the weapon and position anyway. If things go wrong, I need someone who won't hesitate, Torres had said. That's you. At 9 a.m., the armored transport arrived. Garrison emerged in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, face pale but composed. He'd lost weight in custody, and the man who'd once strutted through Mercy General with unearned authority now looked small and breakable. Media crews crowded behind barricades. Reporters shouted questions. Garrison ignored them, flanked by federal marshals moving him toward the courthouse entrance. Sarah scanned the surrounding area through her scope. Rooftops, windows, parked vehicles, anywhere a shooter could establish position. Nothing. Garrison entered the courthouse. The media crowd dispersed slightly. Normal protocols resumed. Sarah's radio crackled. Team 2, anything on your end? Negative. No hostile movement detected. Team 3, clear. Maybe they'd been wrong. Maybe Cade wouldn't risk another public operation. Maybe... Sarah saw it before anyone else could call it out. A delivery van, commercial markings, pulling up to the courthouse loading dock. Wrong time, wrong location, driver moving with purpose that didn't match a routine delivery. Loading dock, she said into her radio. Blue van, suspicious approach. Torres's voice came back immediately. All teams converge on loading dock. Do not let that vehicle breach. The van's rear doors opened. Not explosives, not an assault team, just one person stepping out, hands raised, walking calmly toward the courthouse entrance. Lawrence Cade, wearing a suit, looking like any other attorney arriving for morning proceedings. Hold fire, Torres ordered. He's surrendering. Sarah kept her scope on him. Something was wrong. Cade wouldn't just walk up and surrender after orchestrating an escape that killed 2 agents. He reached the courthouse steps. Federal agents surrounded him, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Cade complied with everything, hands behind his head, on his knees, face down, completely cooperative, too cooperative. It's a distraction, Sarah said into her radio. He's pulling our attention while the explosion came from inside the courthouse. Not large enough to bring down the building, but focused, directed. The kind of blast designed to target a specific room, the arraignment chamber, where Garrison was being processed. Sarah was already moving, abandoning her position, running toward the courthouse. Her shoulder screamed protest, but she ignored it, weapon drawn, pushing through confused civilians and responding emergency personnel. Inside was chaos, smoke, debris, people bleeding and shouting. She found Torres near the arraignment chamber, trying to organize a response while securing the scene. Garrison? Sarah asked. Alive. Injured, but alive. Someone planted a shaped charge under his holding cell. Timer detonation. If he'd been sitting 2 feet to the left, he'd be dead. Where's Cade? Marshals have him secured outside. He's claiming he came to surrender himself voluntarily, that he had nothing to do with the explosion. Sarah pushed past Torres and found Cade sitting in the back of a federal vehicle, handcuffed, looking almost serene. She pulled the door open and stared at him. You knew exactly where that blast would go, she said. You knew the holding cell location, the structural weak points, where to place a charge for maximum effect. Someone fed you that information. Cade smiled slightly. You're very clever, Miss Mitchell, but clever isn't the same as provable. Margaret Sutton, DOJ analyst. She's been feeding you intelligence for years, hasn't she? Helping you identify facilities, avoid investigations, plan operations, and when things went wrong, she helped coordinate your escape. I don't know anyone by that name. You're lying, and when we bring her in, she'll confirm everything to save herself. Cade's smile widened. Will she? Because from what I understand, Margaret Sutton hasn't reported for work in 3 days, and her apartment was found empty this morning with evidence suggesting she fled the country. Such a shame. She was always so reliable. Sarah felt something cold and heavy settle in her chest. He'd eliminated his inside connection, burned the bridge behind him, and walked into custody knowing there was no direct evidence linking him to the explosion. You think you're going to walk, she said quietly. I think I'm going to face trial alongside Dr. Garrison and his colleagues. And I think my very expensive attorneys will argue that I'm a legitimate medical consultant who was victimized by rogue elements within hospitals I advised. I'll express shock and horror at the trafficking operations. I'll cooperate fully with investigations. And in 2 years, maybe 3, I'll be acquitted or given time served for minor infractions. That's not going to happen. Why not? What evidence do you have that I coordinated anything? Recordings of Garrison talking to an unidentified man? Circumstantial connections to shell corporations? Testimony from a witness whose military background includes classified operations and unexplained gaps in her service record? He leaned forward slightly. I've been doing this for a long time, Miss Mitchell. I know how to survive investigations, and I always have contingencies. Sarah wanted to hit him, wanted to drag him out of that vehicle and make him answer for every person who disappeared into his network. But she was surrounded by federal agents and cameras, and violence would only prove his point about her instability. Instead, she stepped back and closed the door. Torres found her outside, watching as Cade was transported to a more secure facility under heavy guard. He's right, isn't he? Sarah said. We can't prove he coordinated the explosion. Sutton's gone. The assault teams are dead or disappeared. The paper trail goes through so many shell corporations that any decent lawyer can create reasonable doubt. Maybe. But we still have the trafficking network. We still have Garrison's testimony and the recordings you made. That's enough to dismantle the Sterling Falls operation. But not enough to stop Cade from building another one somewhere else. He survives the trial, serves a few years maybe, and comes out with new identities and new connections ready to start over. Torres put a hand on Sarah's good shoulder. That's the system. Sometimes bad people game it. Sometimes justice doesn't look the way we want it to. But you did everything you could. You exposed a trafficking operation, saved lives, brought down criminals who thought they were untouchable. That matters. Sarah wanted to believe her, but watching Cade being driven away in that vehicle, calm and confident, made it hard to feel like anything mattered. The trial began 4 weeks later. The Sterling Falls courthouse had been repaired and reinforced, turned into a fortress of security and media attention. News crews from across the country covered the proceedings. Garrison's face appeared on every channel, the disgraced doctor who'd turned a hospital into a trafficking pipeline. Sarah testified for 3 days straight. She walked the jury through everything: the missing patients, the phantom admissions, the conversation she'd recorded, the pattern of exploitation targeting vulnerable people who wouldn't be missed. Defense attorneys attacked her credibility exactly as predicted. They brought up her military service, implied she was unstable, suggested she'd fabricated evidence to support a paranoid conspiracy theory. They painted Garrison as a dedicated physician who'd made poor judgment calls but never intended harm. Sarah stayed composed, answered every question, let the recordings speak for themselves. When Lawrence Cade took the stand, he was the picture of professional concern. He admitted to consulting with Helix Biosolutions but claimed he had no knowledge of criminal activities. He expressed horror at what had happened. He positioned himself as another victim of a sophisticated operation that had deceived everyone. His lawyers were good. Very good. But then Janet Kellerman did something unexpected. She called a witness nobody had mentioned in pretrial proceedings. Margaret Sutton walked into the courtroom in handcuffs, flanked by federal marshals, and took the stand. The courtroom erupted. Cade's composure cracked for the first time. Kellerman approached the witness stand. Miss Sutton, you've agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence, is that correct? Yes. And you were employed by the Department of Justice as an analyst with access to sensitive investigative information? Yes. Did you provide confidential information about federal investigations to Lawrence Cade? Sutton looked at Cade, then at the jury, then back at Kellerman. Yes. For 6 years. He recruited me when I was working in the Portland field office. He offered money, protection, and promised that what he was doing was helping people. By the time I realized what I was actually helping with, I was too deep to get out. What kind of information did you provide? Investigation targets, transport logistics, security protocols, witness identities, anything he needed to stay ahead of federal agencies. Did you help coordinate his escape from federal custody? Yes. Did you provide him with intelligence about the explosion at this courthouse? Sutton's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Yes. He told me it was necessary to protect the network, that if Garrison testified, everyone would go down. I gave him building schematics and security schedules. Kellerman let that hang in the air for a long moment. Then, no further questions. The defense tried to rehabilitate Sutton's testimony, tried to paint her as an unreliable witness, making up stories to reduce her sentence. But the damage was done. The jury had heard a DOJ insider confirm that Cade had orchestrated everything, that he'd been pulling strings for years, that the trafficking operation wasn't a rogue hospital administrator, it was a coordinated network with Cade at the center. The trial lasted 6 more weeks. Testimony from dozens of witnesses, hundreds of pieces of evidence, expert analysis of financial records and communications. Sarah sat through most of it, watching as the machinery of justice slowly ground toward a conclusion. When the jury returned with their verdict, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Lawrence Cade was found guilty on 47 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, human trafficking, racketeering, and about 20 other charges that would ensure he never saw freedom again. Dr. Philip Garrison was found guilty on 32 counts. Helen Voss and David Reeves were found guilty on similar charges. Every major player in the Sterling Falls operation was convicted. The judge set sentencing for 3 months later, but made it clear. These were life sentences. No possibility of parole and no deals, no second chances. As they led Cade out of the courtroom in chains, he looked at Sarah one final time. The confidence was gone. The calculation had been replaced by something uglier: rage, impotence, the bitter realization that he'd finally met someone who wouldn't be intimidated or bought off. Sarah met his eyes and said nothing. She didn't need to. The verdict spoke for itself. The sentencing hearing was quieter than the trial. Less media, less public attention, just the routine machinery of justice wrapping up loose ends. Sarah attended but didn't testify again. She sat in the gallery and watched as the judge handed down sentences that would keep everyone convicted behind bars for the rest of their natural lives. When it was over, she walked out of the courthouse and found Hayes waiting on the steps. "Heard you're leaving Sterling Falls," he said. "Nothing left for me here. The hospital's rebuilding under new administration, but too many people remember me as the nurse who destroyed their workplace. Hard to move forward when everyone's looking at you like you're either a hero or a threat. Where will you go?" "Haven't decided yet. Maybe somewhere smaller, maybe somewhere nobody knows my face." Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then, "I have another option. The Defense Intelligence Agency is building a new unit, civilian consultants who work with military medical operations to identify and disrupt trafficking networks in conflict zones. It's the kind of work you did before, but with better support and fewer political constraints." Sarah looked at him. "You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a purpose. The networks we disrupted here exist everywhere. War zones, refugee camps, places where vulnerable people disappear and nobody notices. We need someone who understands how these operations work and isn't afraid to burn them down." "I thought I was done with that life." "You were never done. You were hiding. There's a difference." Hayes handed her a card with a phone number. "Think about it. No pressure. But if you want to keep fighting instead of running, the door's open." He left before she could respond. Sarah stood on those courthouse steps and looked at Sterling Falls stretching out before her. The city that had been her refuge, her hiding place, the spot where she'd tried to disappear into normalcy. She thought about the 43 people who'd died, about the lives destroyed by Cade's network, about Marcus and Torres and all the people who'd been caught in the machinery of exploitation and had somehow survived. She thought about what Torres had said, that they couldn't destroy the entire network, but they could disrupt it, make it harder, save the people they could save. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it had to be. 3 months later, Sarah stood in a refugee camp in Jordan, treating patients in a makeshift clinic while monitoring suspicious activity at a nearby medical facility. The work was different from Sterling Falls, but fundamentally the same. Vulnerable people, predatory systems, patterns that most people missed, but she'd learned to spot. She joined Hayes' new unit and discovered that the trafficking networks she'd exposed in Sterling Falls were just one branch of a much larger tree. There were dozens of operations worldwide, all feeding into a supply chain that treated human beings as products. But now she wasn't alone. She had resources, support, and a team of people who understood what they were fighting. And slowly, methodically, they were dismantling it piece by piece. One afternoon, her sat phone rang. It was Marcus calling from Sterling Falls. "You were right," he said without preamble, "about everything. I've been thinking about what you said, that walking away means they win. I'm starting a patient advocacy program at Mercy General, something to help vulnerable populations navigate the medical system, make sure nobody falls through the cracks again." "That's good work," Sarah said. "I learned from the best. How are you doing? Where even are you?" "Somewhere hot. Somewhere that needs help." Always the mysterious operative. Some things never change. He paused. "Sarah, what you did, exposing everything, testifying, standing up when everyone else stayed quiet, it mattered. The hospital is different now. The whole system is different. People are paying attention." "Good. Keep them paying attention. That's how you prevent it from happening again." "Will you ever come back?" "Maybe. Someday. But not yet. There's too much work still to do." After she hung up, Sarah looked out across the camp, at people trying to rebuild lives after losing everything, at children who deserved better than the world had given them. She thought about the nurse everyone had dismissed 3 years ago in Sterling Falls, the quiet woman working overnight shifts, trying to disappear, trying to be normal. That person was gone. Maybe she'd never really existed in the first place. What remained was someone who'd learned that standing up meant making enemies, that doing the right thing cost more than staying silent, that justice was messy and incomplete and sometimes looked nothing like victory, but it was still worth fighting for. Because the alternative, letting monsters operate unchallenged, letting systems prey on the vulnerable, letting silence protect the guilty, wasn't something she could live with. Director Walsh had been right about one thing. Hayes said she was the best combat medic he'd ever worked with because she saved lives in impossible situations. But what he hadn't said, what maybe he didn't realize, was that she'd also learned how to fight for those lives when medicine alone wasn't enough. The quiet nurse they'd mocked and dismissed and tried to destroy had become something else entirely. Not a hero in any traditional sense, not someone who won cleanly or walked away unscathed, just someone who refused to be silent when silence meant complicity. And in a world full of people who looked the other way, who justified exploitation as business, who convinced themselves that some lives mattered less than others, that refusal was its own kind of power. Sarah Mitchell picked up her medical kit and walked back toward the clinic, ready to treat the next patient, ready to watch for the next pattern, ready to stand in the gap between vulnerability and violence one more time. Because that's what she did. Not because it was easy, not because anyone would thank her for it, but because some fights were worth having even when you knew they'd never truly end. And she was just getting started.